The world is holding its breath as the epicenter of geopolitical power shifts dramatically toward the center of Europe. We are watching history's page turning in real time, not in diplomatic backrooms, but across the cold steel and hardened concrete of Germany's capital. Berlin, a city historically defined by division, is now the volatile junction where financial raw force meets military ultimatum. The news broke hours ago. High-stakes American real estate titan Steven Witkoff is making a massive, high-value play in Berlin. This isn't just a development deal. It is a seismic event, sending absolute shock waves through European capitals. It signals the immediate and urgent integration of U.S. financial might directly into the strategic core of the European theater. This extraordinary and dangerous move, this daring commitment of billions, is the sound of Western confidence hardening into posture, a clear declaration that the West views this conflict not as a temporary crisis, but as the new, permanent reality defining the 21st century. When global investors plant flags, they are not seeking compromise, they are betting on dominance. But as the Western infrastructure pivot accelerates, a furious, absolute counterforce is roaring out of Kyiv. President Zelensky has delivered what can only be described as an unusually blunt threat, an ultimatum that completely incinerates any illusions of an imminent negotiated peace. The message is clear, echoing across every intelligence agency and chancery in the world. There will be no ceasefire talks. Period. Zelensky has drawn a definitive, unyielding red line, one cemented in blood and resolve. His exact words were chillingly unambiguous. Discussions about a ceasefire will only begin when Russian forces are not just halted, but actively withdrawn from every square kilometer of internationally recognized Ukrainian territory. This is not a starting point for negotiation. This is the complete obliteration of the current diplomatic framework. It is the end of the concept of territory for peace. The implication is staggering. By drawing this red line, Kyiv is eliminating the possibility of a frozen conflict, the one option the Kremlin desperately sought to stabilize its current gains. Zelensky's position means the war must, by necessity, intensify. This shifts dramatically the stakes for both sides, moving the strategic calculus squarely into the zone of outright military decision. This is not brinkmanship. This is throwing the entire table over. The geopolitical temperature hasn't just risen, it has boiled over. We are now witnessing a simultaneous escalation on two distinct fronts. The economic declaration of intent from the West, embodied by figures like Witkoff betting billions on Berlin's central role, and the military declaration of intent from Kyiv, refusing to yield an inch. Both moves are inherently escalatory. Both movements indicate that the era of ambiguous diplomacy is finished. Kyiv's resolute response is driven by the conviction that any ceasefire agreement now would simply reward occupation and allow the aggressor to regroup. The message to Moscow and to every hesitant Western ally is uncompromising. Ukraine will not be intimidated into accepting a temporary pause that validates territorial conquest. The consequences of this red line are immediate. Russia must now calculate whether to launch massive new offensive maneuvers to secure enough terrain to force a negotiation, or face the prospect of a perpetual, grinding war of attrition where Ukraine, backed by exponentially increasing Western investment, aims solely for total liberation. This puts immense, unsustainable pressure on the Russian command structure. This junction in Berlin, fueled by capital and confrontation, defines the era. We are watching the dangerous collision of high finance and high-stakes warfare. Zelensky's ultimatum ensures that the only path forward involves expanding this conflict, deepening the commitment, and accepting the harrowing consequences of a fight to the finish. The time for soft words is over. The diplomatic landscape has been torched. We are no longer discussing ceasefires. We are witnessing an ultimatum delivered with the raw force of a nation that will not be intimidated. This is the crux of Section 2, deconstructing the red line. Zelensky's stance is not merely political posturing. It is an extraordinary and dangerous commitment. He has drawn the red line not in the sand, but in concrete reinforced with blood and iron. This is the definitive end of any plausible peace process under current conditions. The Ukrainian president's declaration that he will not engage in dialogue until every single centimeter of sovereign territory is reclaimed is not just rhetoric. It is an unusually blunt threat that slams the door shut on multilateral talks. This red line is absolute. It means the only path to a cessation of hostilities is complete military capitulation by Moscow, something Vladimir Putin simply cannot afford, politically or strategically. This means escalation is guaranteed. The situation shifts dramatically. We are watching the international geopolitical page turning in real time, and it is a bloody chapter being authored right now. Every diplomatic signal, every quiet backchannel effort, is now nullified, echoing across European capitals as a failure of sustained engagement. This unyielding stance, this refusal to yield territory for peace, will inevitably harden into posture for NATO and Western allies, demanding greater lethal aid commitments and recognizing that the goal is no longer stabilization, but eradication of the invading force. The global shock waves from this resolute response are already registering. When a major world leader, one sustained by the full economic and military weight of the West, publicly declares that peace talks are impossible, the definition of war itself changes. It moves from a localized conflict to a war of attrition where the only metrics are territory gained and blood spilled. This is not about regaining leverage. This is about rejecting compromise entirely and expanding this conflict to its ultimate, harrowing conclusion. Zelensky's move is daring. He is banking on continued Western resolve, while forcing allies to confront the sheer impossibility of an intermediate peace. This pushes Berlin, Paris, and Washington into a diplomatic black hole, where their stated goal, a negotiated settlement, is now explicitly rejected by their principal partner. Moscow's reaction? It is furious. They interpret this as a signal that Kyiv is dedicated to expanding this conflict, aiming for high-value strategic targets deep within Russian-held zones, and refusing to respect any existing front lines. We must understand the direct consequence of this ultimatum. It mandates further, rapid military escalation. If diplomacy is dead, the only remaining tool is kinetic action. This is the moment when NATO weapon supplies cease being merely defensive and become instrumental in achieving the maximum objective: total victory. When Zelensky says he will not be intimidated, he is also saying he will not be stopped, regardless of the danger this poses to the wider European order. This geopolitical earthquake sets us on a trajectory defined by maximum confrontation. The previous narratives, the slow grind, the frozen conflict hypothesis, they are obsolete. They have been overridden by a single, powerful declaration of intent. Zelensky is demanding total withdrawal. That is a demand Moscow will meet only with countermeasures, raising the stakes exponentially and confirming the immediate threat of a wider, more unpredictable conflict spreading far beyond Ukraine's borders. This is a deliberate, calculated move to make Western commitment permanent and total, embracing the full, terrifying risk that comes with rejecting the negotiating table entirely. We must now prepare for the next phase of this war, the phase where diplomacy is dead, and only the raw force of arms decides the outcome. The black hole of negotiation is sealed. The countdown to intensified conflict has begun. This red line is unforgiving. And now we pivot to the grim, immediate aftermath echoing across the financial capitals of Europe. The raw force unleashed by Kyiv's resolute response to perceived bad faith is immediately creating opportunity. This isn't just diplomacy dying. This is money-smelling blood. The timing of developer Steven Witkoff's announced arrival in Berlin is not accidental. It's a predatory confirmation that a new page is turning in real time. A page written in capital flight and distressed assets. This is Section 3, Capital Flight and Opportunism. Witkoff's timing in Berlin and the scramble for distressed European assets. Witkoff's move is daring. He is stepping directly into the economic vacuum created by Europe's systemic energy panic and the resulting mass divestment. This geopolitical chaos is generating the most extraordinary and dangerous buying environment in decades. We are witnessing the first major financial consequence of Zelensky's red line. The shock waves of intensified conflict are hitting property markets first. Assets that were once considered bedrock secure are now discounted because the risk profile shifts dramatically toward instability. These are high-value assets, the jewels of European real estate and logistics, now suddenly attainable for those who can withstand the geopolitical heat. Remember, Europe's economy has been fundamentally destabilized by the war next door. Energy costs, inflation, and regulatory uncertainty have driven institutional investors to the sidelines. That hesitation is opportunity for the truly aggressive, the ones who recognize that distress is a price, and that the greatest profits are found where the political risks are highest. This is the definition of wartime speculation. The presence of this caliber of American capital in Berlin right now sends an unusually blunt threat. A threat aimed not at Moscow, but at the stability of the Eurozone itself. It suggests that major players believe this confrontation will not recede. It will harden into posture. They are betting that the conflict is not a temporary shock, but a new, defining characteristic of the European economic landscape. This capital is not running away. It is running toward the wreckage. That decision is furious in its intent, calculated in its cruelty. The question we must ask is this: what does it mean when the financial world is prepared to profit so openly from the imminent escalation? It means they believe we will not be intimidated by the prospect of expanding this conflict. It means they see long-term profit in long-term war. The financial calculus validates Zelensky's rejection of talks. Why? Because the market is pricing in the reality that the West is structurally prepared to sustain a wider war, and the resulting economic dislocation is simply collateral damage. Collateral damage profitable to those with massive cash reserves. We are witnessing two parallel forms of raw force being exerted simultaneously: the military force in the East, and the financial force echoing through the property deeds of German banks. This isn't just opportunism. It is the cynical exploitation of political terror. The capital pouring into Berlin is essentially betting that the geopolitical tension will continue, driving prices down further. They are buying the floor created by conflict. And if the West allows capital to feast on the spoils of an ongoing crisis, it removes a critical pressure valve. It creates an incentive structure that favors war, not peace. This whole environment is extraordinary and dangerous. This is how the global stage shifts dramatically. The next few weeks will tell us if Europe is ready to confront the financial vultures circling its distressed assets, or if it will simply accept that war, and the massive profits derived from it, is the new, terrifying normal. The red line Zelensky drew has immediate, tangible, terrifying economic consequences, and the vultures are already feeding, confirming that the countdown to intensified conflict is also a countdown to unprecedented private gain. The stakes are everything. The window for controlled diplomacy is slammed shut. And now the true cost of escalation is being measured, not just in casualties, but in the fire sale price of Central European skyscrapers. We are in the acceleration phase. And acceleration means profit for those who dare to step into the blast radius. It means extraordinary opportunity for the few willing to accept extraordinary and dangerous risk. Look at the headlines tonight. Witkoff, one of New York's most aggressive real estate titans, is making a massive, concentrated push into Berlin, a city just a few hundred miles from the active conflict zone. This is not casual investment. This is a highly calculated, high-value move predicated on the understanding that disruption is the new normal. Global capital is positioning itself to harvest the assets that instability creates. They are betting on the long game of chaos, seeing vulnerability where others see peril. They are buying the economic trauma caused by war and converting it into future yield. This daring financial maneuver defines the modern war economy, a predatory system where geopolitical stress acts as a mechanism for wealth transfer. The nearer you are to the geopolitical core, the greater the discount. Witkoff is betting that Central Europe's current proximity to the raw force of a major land war has temporarily undervalued its core assets. But this high-wire act of global finance is taking place simultaneously with the most dramatic and dangerous diplomatic turn of the year. The veneer of controlled negotiation has cracked completely. We have just witnessed President Zelensky lay down a red line that cannot be ignored, a line that sends seismic shockwaves directly through those Berlin investment committees. The ceasefire talks, dead, killed by an immediate and total refusal to countenance any settlement that sanctions the current geography of conflict. Zelensky delivered an unusually blunt threat, stating clearly that any cessation of hostilities that doesn't involve the full and verifiable return of occupied territory will not be recognized as peace. It will be seen as a pause, a tactical retreat, or a surrender. This is a fundamental refusal to negotiate under duress. This is his red line, drawn in the very soil of the conflict zone. His declaration is echoing across NATO capitals tonight. The situation shifts dramatically. It's a furious counterpunch to those, in Moscow and in certain Western corridors of power, who assumed financial pressure and battlefield attrition would force Kyiv to the table to accept a partition. That assumed leverage has just vanished. This is no longer tactical maneuvering. This will harden into posture. This is an escalation that moves the conflict away from potential diplomatic off-ramps and directly onto the path of prolonged, intense confrontation. We are watching the page turning in real time from tentative negotiation to absolute, resolute response. The message is clear. His government will not be intimidated by threats, whether military or economic. They will not be forced into a settlement that rewards aggression. The acceleration phase means the financial predators, the Witkoffs of the world, have to adjust their models instantly. Their enormous investments in the perceived safety zone of Central Europe now hinge entirely on the ability of Ukraine to repel this aggression and enforce that red line. The risk assessment for global finance just exploded. They positioned themselves for a discounted asset recovery based on a controlled settlement. Now the Ukrainian stance means that asset recovery is only possible after a decisive victory. A victory that requires expanding this conflict in terms of scope, cost, and risk, until that red line is fully respected. The architects of global capital are now making multi-billion-dollar bets whose failure means catastrophic global instability, all while military and political leaders exchange declarations of war, not peace. The war economy has achieved critical mass. We are standing on the edge, where the proximity to raw force defines the price of everything. The geopolitical standoff and the high-value real estate transaction are inextricably linked. The stakes are no longer just territory. The stakes are the stability of the entire European banking system, tethered now by a very thin thread to one Ukrainian president's demand for absolute justice. This is the financial front line, and every analyst who thought the conflict could be contained is now recalculating the speed of the current, a current moving toward outright confrontation. The window is not just shut, it is welded closed. We will be right back with the true implications of this furious standoff and what it means for your portfolio. Next, we warned you about the furious standoff. Now look where the money is moving. This isn't just about diplomacy failing. It's about global capital anticipating war. The moment Steven Witkoff confirms his investment entry into Berlin, a city now viewed as the hinge of NATO's eastern mobilization, you must understand the geopolitical calculus shifts dramatically. This is not just a construction project. It is a high-value, undeniable marker of Western strategic commitment, echoing across the entire continent. When titans of industry place chips of this size, they are not betting on a short ceasefire. They are betting on resilience and the long-term extraction of value from manufactured instability. While the deal makers are measuring the cost of capital, the front line is experiencing an escalation that is both extraordinary and dangerous. President Zelensky's declaration yesterday was not a rhetorical flourish. It was an unusually blunt threat that completely redraws the diplomatic map. He stated unequivocally that any discussion of a ceasefire based on the current lines of contact is dead, buried under the weight of sustained aggression. This is his red line, painted not in ink, but in the certainty of a continuing conflict. This declaration solidifies what many strategists feared. The time for managed negotiation is over. Political posturing is beginning to harden into a posture that demands raw force meet raw force. The question is no longer if escalation will occur, but how quickly, and who is funding the acceleration. This is where we dive into the deep, dark machinery of the shadow cabinets. These are the networks of powerful individuals, the hedge fund managers, the energy speculators, the defense contractors, and the crisis developers, who thrive in the vacuum created by sustained international turmoil. They are the architects of the financial shock waves that follow every missile launch. They are making daring maneuvers right now, ensuring that the flow of funds supports the conflict's indefinite continuation. The ethics of this crisis investment are irrelevant to them. Only the yield matters. We are watching the page turning in real time, shifting away from controlled diplomatic channels toward an open acknowledgement that the status quo is permanently broken and profitable. These shadow cabinets are injecting liquidity where governments fear to tread, betting on the need for deep infrastructural rebuilding and massive military restocking. The leaders on both sides are showing they will not be intimidated. Kyiv's resolute response to Russian demands has been met with cold fury in Moscow, seen as an unacceptable provocation. The danger now lies in miscalculation, driven by the confidence of those who stand to gain. Every billion channeled into reconstruction promises or defensive infrastructure by these power brokers serves to legitimize expanding this conflict. They are incentivized by chaos, and their investment validates the war machine. This movement of capital, this willingness to invest so deeply into the friction points, proves that the shadow cabinets believe the conflict will churn long past the point where politicians lose their nerve. They are locking in the future of conflict. And when the titans bet on war, you must assume the terrifying escalation is already factored into the market price. The stakes are immense, and the reality is clear. Are these investors truly enabling the defense of freedom, or are they simply profiting from the catastrophic destruction that guarantees their extraordinary returns? The difference is vanishing fast, and the world shifts dramatically under the pressure of raw force and unchecked capital. We must confront the reality that the profit margin for destruction is now driving the geopolitical agenda. The world just witnessed the collapse of the diplomatic fantasy. President Zelensky did not just issue a statement. He drew an undeniable red line in the sand, an unusually blunt threat that reverberates across every trading floor and defense ministry on Earth. No negotiation, no ceasefire, unless every last inch of sovereign territory is returned. This shifts dramatically the calculus of war. We are watching the page turning in real time, away from the pretense of negotiation, straight into the extraordinary and dangerous realm of open, military confrontation without off-ramps. The hope for a temporary or negotiated settlement, already threadbare, has been shredded by this resolute response. Moscow's reaction is not merely diplomatic displeasure. It is furious. The Kremlin views this red line not as a demand for peace, but as a direct challenge to the exercise of their raw force. And challenges demand answers that utilize overwhelming power. This refusal to even contemplate a pause, a freeze, or a partial withdrawal is rapidly going to harden into posture on both sides, ensuring that the conflict cannot remain constrained. We are entering a phase of rapid escalation, leaving the defined battlefields for high-value targets. This is the moment where controlled military action gives way to desperation and high value. Daring strikes designed purely to intimidate, designed purely to make the cost of that red line intolerable. Forget soft power. Forget measured sanctions. The only language being spoken now is the language of maximum strategic pressure and artillery fire. And if you think this is confined to the front lines, you are catastrophically mistaken. The shock waves are already hitting the eastern capital markets, fracturing the investment thesis that drove the interest of men like Witkoff in Berlin. We are facing a structural, violent repricing of risk across the entire continental divide. Investors who banked on stability, who bet on a temporary conflict leading to guaranteed rebuilding contracts, they are now realizing that guaranteed rebuilding is only possible if the fighting stops. If the fighting continues, or worse, if the fighting escalates as it surely will, the contracts are worthless, dissolved in the toxic geopolitical acid of expanding this conflict. This is an extraordinary and dangerous moment because this red line is not just about Ukraine's immediate security. It is a signal to NATO. It is a signal to Beijing. It is the definitive declaration that sovereignty will not be negotiated under duress. Zelensky has stated unequivocally that his nation will not be intimidated. But the price of that resolve is paid in global instability and market panic. We must grapple with the undeniable reality that the profit margins we discussed earlier, the potential for massive gain in post-war reconstruction, are now directly dependent on winning a total war, not negotiating a messy peace. The sound we hear right now, echoing through the empty halls of diplomacy, is the raw force of empires colliding. This is not the end of the conflict. This is the terrifying, unvarnished beginning of true global fallout. The capital that was seeking guaranteed, predatory returns is now fleeing, dissolving the foundations of Eastern market stability. Every metric is screaming catastrophe. We are witnessing the geopolitical divorce that ensures maximum pain and maximum escalation. The window for sanity has slammed shut. We are locked in a zero-sum game of attrition. The only way out is through, and the path through is paved with far greater destruction.